Thank you all for coming. Ellen Meister is the author of 3 previous novels, The Other Life, The Smart One, and Secret Confessions of the Applewood PTA. She currently lives on Long Island and teaches creative writing at Hofstra University and runs an online group where she mentors aspiring women authors. Please join me in welcoming author of Farewell, Dorothy Parker, Ellen Meister.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the members of the Academy, my director, Weinstein. Wait, wrong speech. But thank you all for coming out on this day that the Oscars are. I hope you're not, missing too much of the red carpet stuff, but we got our own excitement here, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, who needs the Oscars when you've got a dream come true? Like, I probably do. Yeah, it's all that electricity. So, okay, you guys can hear me okay? All right, so listen. First of all, thank you, Book Revue. I love this store. We all have to support our independent bookstores, so yay! I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled that you're interested in my book. If you want to buy anything else while you're here, I think that Book Revue would be absolutely thrilled. So, yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I'm not going to go on for too long. What I like to do is give a really brief little talk, a really brief reading, a little minuscule reading, and then take your questions. So if you have anything to ask, to me, that's the more sort of exciting, dynamic part of any presentation. So that's how we're going to work it. And then after that, I'll do a signing. We do have some nice refreshments in the back. So if you want a glass of wine and cookie, a piece of cheese, we've got all that going on. So, okay. Yeah, so the thing about this book that I'm so excited about is that in a way it really feels like this book has been inside of me my whole life. Even though, the actual idea for writing it didn't come to me so many years ago. I've carried Dorothy Parker around inside of me my whole life. I've been a huge fan of her since I first discovered her when I was a teenager. And, in those days, I really thought that my generation, we invented sex, we invented heartbreak, we introduced 4-letter words into the vernacular. So discovering Dorothy Parker, who was doing all of that as far back as the 1920s, was something of a revelation to me. And I immediately fell in love with her sarcasm, her pithy wit, her short stories. And then how could you not love a poet who would write something like, this is an entire poem, right? It's called Comment. Oh, life is a glorious cycle of song, a medley of extemporanea, and love is a thing that can never go wrong, and I am Maria of Romania. Sarcasm and poetry, it really doesn't get better than that. But I didn't just fall in love with their poems, but also her essays and short stories and her very, very funny witticisms. And for the uninitiated, I'm just going to give you a little Dorothy Parker, appetizer sampler of some of her famous witticisms. Now, many of you know that she was a member of the Algonquin Round Table, which was a group of wits who met daily for lunch at the Algonquin Round Table throughout the 1920s, really. There were a lot of famous writers and authors and actors and other people you might have heard of, but Dorothy Parker probably is the one that's remembered most for her wit. But a lot of the things that they said, the witticisms that they uttered at the Algonquin Round Table, are still being quoted today. So one of the things they used to do was ask one another if they could use a word in a sentence. And somebody asked Dorothy Parker if she could use the word horticulture in a sentence. And Dorothy Parker said, you can lead a horticulture, but you can't make her think. So this is what I'm talking about, the 1920s, right? So she also said, and I think, if any of you have ever lived in Manhattan, you can relate to this. It's a small apartment. I've barely enough room to lay my hat and a few friends. She once found herself pregnant from a man who wanted nothing more to do with her, and she said, it serves me right for putting all my eggs in one bastard. Yes, should I have warned you that things are a little bit colorful? She also said, you can't teach it. Look, she also said, I keep shutting this off. I'm going to stop touching it. That's it. Okay. She also said, you can't teach an old dogma new tricks. She said, oh, I can't say this one in mixed company. I'm going to skip that one. It has the F word in it. But you probably know it anyway. I read that one to the Manhattan crowd, but I'm a little afraid here to put it out. Who knows who's in this big bookstore here. She also said, if all the girls who attended the Yale prom were laid end to end, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. And one of the ones I like because it really relates to the fact that I fictionalized Dorothy Parker is she once said, I don't care what is written about me so long as it isn't true. So, yeah, that sort of helped me, get through writing this novel. And just to give you a little bit of background about how this book got started, I was actually, when I got the idea, I was in the middle of another project that I was really struggling with. I was writing a proposal for another book. One that, by the way, to this day, I still haven't finished and I'm still struggling with. It might be my magnum opus one day, I don't know. But sometimes there were just projects that are really going to plague you for years and years. So I was in the middle of that other project, trying to nail it, trying to get it right, and I was still completely dedicated to it. When I was thinking about the fact there were so many books on the market that pay homage to the wonderful and brilliant Jane Austen. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, and I think her work is brilliant. And I think it's great because it indicates that people are literate and reading and love the classics. But I thought it was interesting that it was only Jane Austen, and that there are no other beloved women authors that are getting similar treatment. And I thought, and I honestly wasn't thinking ideas at that point. I just said to myself, somebody should do that for one of my favorite beloved authors, like Dorothy Parker. And then I went, oh, me. So, as soon as I had that thought, I just was absolutely lit up. I said, this could really be a book. And I'm not saying the idea sort of formed itself and came to me all at once. I'm not one of those writers who gets, ideas dropped on them from the heavens and the whole, story comes together. I actually have to work really, really, really hard on story. But in this particular case, as soon as I thought about Dorothy Parker, I saw her ghost rematerializing in a modern woman's home and really taking up residence there. I mean, I just saw her in a wingback chair in somebody's house and becoming her friend. And I said, that's a novel. I don't have a story, but that's a novel. So the first thing I did was I wanted to check and see if anybody had ever done it before, because it almost seemed like such a natural, I couldn't believe it. So I did the usual things. I checked Amazon and I checked the publishing industry websites, and I was shocked to discover it was really my idea. It hadn't been done. So I was so excited that I attacked the project in a slightly different way from how I usually go about writing a new book. Because what I usually do is I keep my ideas very private, because sometimes when you're at those early, and my writer friends will probably attest to this, the creative process can be really delicate, especially in the beginning, and if you sort of share it with people, they could say things that could make it difficult. But in this particular case, I felt like the idea was too hot to sit on. So instead of sitting down and working out the entire plot and trying to write a few chapters and seeing if I could nail the voice, I went right into Manhattan to meet with my agent and pitch the idea like the way movie people pitch an idea. And the reaction was exactly as I had hoped. It was just this unbridled enthusiasm. They were so excited. They said, yes, 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 write this book. So, what did I do? I went home and I started to work on the book. Now, I wasn't naive enough to think it was going to be easy to write. I've been at this long enough to know that it's always really hard to write a book. But I thought with this one at least that I had a little bit of a leg up because I had a character. I said, I don't have to develop this character of Dorothy Parker. She already exists, and she's a phenomenal character. She's witty, and she's got depth, and she's got pain, and she's got a voice. And all I have to do is sort of steep myself in the research, sort of get her voice inside my head, and imagine her in my scenes, and I'll be able to, capture Dorothy Parker. Well, once I started to write it, I said, okay, yeah, I must have been out of my mind, because here I am trying to capture probably the wittiest, pithiest, and most economical voice in the entire 20th century, America. So I had a renewed respect for her because I realized that I had to edit her lines with laser precision. And, this was somebody who didn't write on a computer. She wrote on a typewriter when editing was much more difficult, which, helps us to understand why when she really complained about how long it took her to write. She said she was a very slow writer. She said, I can't write 5 words, but that I changed 7. So she was, she was that precise, and I really felt it when I was working on her dialogue and giving voice to her. So before I do the reading, I just want to tell you one more thing. I said I was going to keep it brief. I just want to tell you one more thing about Dorothy Parker, because in addition to trying to get across her voice, it was important for me to get across the whole person, because I know that a lot of people are familiar with her pithy poems, and a lot of people are familiar with her poetry, and a lot of people might even be familiar with the fact that, she had her heart broken a lot, and might even be familiar with her depression. She did try to commit suicide several times. I mean, she was could be a pretty dark individual. But there was another side of Dorothy Parker that people don't really know, and that is that she had this big, generous heart for humanity and for equal rights and for, every living human being. So much so that during the 1920s, there was a very famous murder trial. There were 2 Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, who were tried and convicted of murder and sentenced to death. And it was quite clear to everyone, whether they thought they might have been guilty or not, that the trial was very, very clearly biased, and the judge was clearly biased. He had made several, racist comments. So Dorothy Parker protested the execution of these men, which, this wasn't this was not a politically correct time. So when she did this, and she was, amid taunts of people calling her, a communist and a guinea lover and red scum and all this stuff, and she was brave enough and bold enough to get up there and protest this terrible injustice, and she got herself arrested for it. So I want to make sure people knew that side of her, and also the side of her. She died in 1967. So she was there during the very beginning of not the end, but the very beginning of the civil rights movement. And she took it so to heart and felt so strongly about it that when she died, she didn't leave her estate to a relative or a friend or some literary cause. She left her entire estate to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for the civil rights movement. And if you can really put yourself in the place of what was going on in America at that time, I thought this was a very heavy and telling thing for her to do, and she'd never met him. So I just wanted you to know that about Dorothy Parker, because I think it's important and it's interesting. And so in addition to the wit in the book, I wanted to make sure that I honored her memory to get that side of her across as well. So with that said, I'm going to do a very short reading from a scene within the book. Now you have to understand that Dorothy Parker at this point, she's a ghost, but she's taken on corporeal form so that she actually exists as a living, breathing person who can move around freely, almost freely, not quite freely, but move around in this world. So here I have her in a scene. She needs a cigarette. She's walking. She's still drinking and smoking, by the way, even though she's dead. She's walking toward the 7-Eleven with my main character, Violet, who's the movie critic that she becomes sort of mentor and tormentor to. So here's the conversation between them. Dorothy Parker has been kind of down on herself as they're taking this walk, and she says to Violet, "I'm nothing but a wisecracker." "You're much more than that," Violet said. "Besides, your wisecracks are legendary." "Exactly," Dorothy Parker said. "All I'm remembered for are my dreadful jokes." They turned onto the commercial street and approached the convenience store. "Your jokes aren't awful," Violet said, "and anyway, your short stories and poems are still being read. How many writers have that kind of longevity?" My longevity is the sort I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Witness this, she said, and waylaid a disheveled man, elderly man, on his way out of the store. Sir, she said, have you ever heard of Dorothy Parker? Sure. She was abroad who said men never make passes at girls who wear glasses. See what I mean? Mrs. Parker said to Violet. It's all anyone will ever remember. One smart-ass little poem. You got a couple of bucks you could spare for a sandwich? Asked the old man. Certainly not, Mrs. Parker said. And it's seldom. Men seldom make passes at girls who wear glasses. The man rubbed the stubble on his face. Seldom, never, who gives a damn? Precisely, said Mrs. Parker. The man stood looking at the two women, his eyes cloudy and sad, and it occurred to Violet that he might really need the money for a sandwich. She considered giving him those few bucks he requested, but she was torn, like she always was, with desperate drunks. As she knew the odds were pretty good, he would use the money to buy another bottle of whatever was in the paper bag he held. Mrs. Parker seemed oblivious to the man's plight, and so he shrugged and walked off to find a place to sit against the side of the building. Shall we go in? Mrs. Parker said. And Violet explained that they couldn't take the dogs into the store. They had little dogs with them. And so one of them would have to wait outside and hold the leashes. If you don't mind, said Mrs. Parker, I'll go in and see what brands they offer. It'll be a regular adventure for me. She held out her hand. $1, please. Violet laughed. What's so funny? Mrs. Parker asked. Violet pointed to the sign in the window that said cigarettes, $9.99. For one pack? Heavens, it really is the end of the world. Violet handed her mentor a 20 and watched as she went into the store, carrying the tote bag containing the guest book. And now there's sort of a scene as Violet sort of has a flashback, and then Dorothy Parker walks out of the store again. Violet noticed a shadow over her and looked up to see Dorothy Parker standing beside her smoking a cigarette. Ready to go? Violet asked. Just 1 minute, Mrs. Parker said, and pulled a wrapped package from the paper bag. It wasn't until she walked over to the disheveled old man and handed it to him that Violet realized what it was. A sandwich.